We are in our 28th episode of the Clements Bookworm, so we're super excited to have you with us today. And I'm Angela Unk, Director of Development at the Clements Library. I just want to remind you that today's meeting is being recorded to share online. And this afternoon, you will receive an email with the recording and the resources mentioned in today's broadcast. If you joined us early, you heard us talking a little bit about today's poll question, and we've been discussing fun ways to have props or special photo shoots. If you have any fun stories, we'd love to hear them in the chat section. And if you're just joining us, be sure to click on that poll question. I just want to give you a quick tutorial in case this is your first time with us. As I just mentioned, we love to have you participate in the chat. So continue to chime in, select all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your comments and participate in the conversation. But since the conversation does go by very quickly, we ask that you put your questions for the panelists in the Q&A section. There you can also see the questions that other audience members are asking. And if it's a question you have as well, you can give it a thumbs up, which will upvote it and send it to the top of the queue. If you have additional comments or answers related to those questions, you can also post them there. My colleagues Ann Bennington-Helber and Tracy Peovich will be monitoring the chat and posting helpful links in there as well. So thank you to them. Today's program is brought to you by the William L. Clements Library on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. The Clements Library enables the discovery, learning, and teaching of American history. Oh, no, thank you. There we go. Where am I? Clements Library, yes. Enables the discovery, learning, and teaching of American history through the collection, conservation, digitization, and availability of primary sources on paper. Today's episode is very generously sponsored by a Clements Bookworm appreciator who wished to remain anonymous, but we thank them very much. All right, last chance to click on today's poll, and I will share the results once I figure out how to get back to the poll. Somehow I lost it. All right, so we wondered about this. It seems like many of you have not had a photography session where you had a carefully chosen prop. So 73% of the respondents said no, and 27% said yes. So we'll be talking more about how people think through their representations in photography. And so maybe you'll have some more ideas to share with us in the chat about your own experiences later. All right. And now it is my pleasure to welcome our Clements 2019-2021 Joyce Bonk Fellow and graduate student at the School of Information, Samantha Hill, as well as our graphics curator, Clayton Lewis. Excuse me. Samantha is a Chicago-based artist and educator who produces archive-based exhibits, educational projects, and presentations. She received her Master of Fine Arts in 2010 from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and developed projects for the Anchorage Museum, the Black Museum at Northwestern University, Museum of Contemporary Photography at Columbia College, and the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture at the University of Chicago. Hill is also the creator of the Kinship Project, a community archive of photographs and artifacts from African American families dated between 1839 to 2012. Hill's creative work is featured in the book Problematizing Public Pedagogy, published by Routledge Press. Samantha came to the Clements in 2019 as the Joyce Bonk Fellow. The fellowship was established by a former assistant curator of books, Joyce Bonk, offering a program combining education and work experience for students receiving their master's at the School of Information. Clayton Lewis oversees the Clements collection of historical prints, photographs, artwork, illustrated sheet music, ephemera, and other visual materials. He assists researchers and promotes the use of visual materials as a source for advanced scholarship. Clayton worked closely with Samantha on this exhibit, as well as an additional student curated exhibit we highlighted last week in a program. So you can check that one out as well. All right, so welcome both of you. It's exciting to have you here.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm really excited.
Well, the question that I have for you, Samantha, knowing that you started at the Clements in 2019, is at what point did you know that you wanted to do an exhibit?
So when I accepted my fellowship, one of the things that was mentioned was the internship. And usually for a USMI student, you would apply for a job and you would just do the task. But the Bonk Fellow has an opportunity to actually create their own internship experience. So because I have such a large and long history with the arts, I wanted to create an exhibit in the library setting and learn more about that. So I proposed it to basically the curators, and they fully supported it.
That's so great. Yeah, we really enjoy seeing what people come up with. And I know that one of the things that I've heard the curators talk about as well is even once you know you want to do an exhibit, it's still sometimes hard to figure out what the theme is. So at what point did the theme emerge?
So during my well, actually during my fellowship, I was the digitation technician, and so I had an opportunity to digitize a lot of different materials from the manuscripts collection and the graphics collection. One of the interesting things about being a fellow is that you do work closely with the curators. So they knew about my love and study of African American culture. So they would give me materials from the collection that were based in that. And so basically, as I'm looking through all these materials, I'm also reading books from former professors. And so one of my advisors, Sean Michelle Smith, wrote a book, basically Pictures in Progress. So I was reading that and reading a lot about Frederick Douglass. So, and looking at these materials and thinking like, the philosophies of Frederick Douglass and his lectures about photography, and how he actually started to create or form this idea of self-representation through photography, which helped the African American culture emerge, like, early in American history. So I wanted to explore that through the collections here at the Clemens, and that's how it started.
Yes. Well, thank you. I just want to point out to people in case they weren't yet Bookworm participants that we got to hear some of those early thoughts as you were thinking about identity and photography when you were on an earlier episode, episode 5 actually, of the Bookworm. So I just want to mention that in case anyone wants to watch that video, because that was really a great discussion as well. So I think we're ready to hear some more about framing identity.
Okay, let's get started. So when you think about framing identity, especially like the way I was going about this, I want you to really think about the term Black excellence. So what is Black excellence? If you think about how racial bias works, how racism works, it really does kind of shut down the person who experienced it. It takes away their accomplishments, it takes away their self-esteem, and it makes them feel less than their better selves. So what you do in that experience is that you look for empowering moments. You work harder, you work longer. Sometimes it takes three times the time, or we have to work three times harder than a Caucasian might have to work just to be considered equal. And what happens is that you create Black excellence. You create this wonderful product or work that helps you excel and lift and inspire. So, what I would like to do is show you the kind of emergence of Black excellence, starting with Frederick Douglass. So, if you look here at this frontispiece portrait, this is a detail from Frederick Douglass's book, the Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. So here, like during this period of time, the author always had their basically photo or picture that accompanied their book. And Frederick Douglass did not like this illustration. He didn't think that it represented him. And he once said in Age with Pictures that the author always accompanies the book, and that the image is never that accompanies that book is always associated with the person, and they can't escape that image, whether it resembles them or not. So basically, I found this stereotype in at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it was taken in 1855. And if you look at it, like Frederick Douglass is looking straight out at us through the into the camera, and he's gazing, and you see this strong, confident person. He's not smiling because he didn't want to take on the idea of the happy slave, but you do get a sense of his personality. And with that, that really he wanted people to capture that and connect to that. So for his next book, he decided to use a daguerreotype image instead of a hand. Bondage and My Freedom. Now this is also noticed taken in, was published in 1855. So you'll see like how the image before resembles this basically printing that's in the book. This is one of the first representations or first examples of how a person can represent themselves and how Frederick Douglass decided to represent himself in print. He spoke often about the power of photography and what it can do to like make yourself a self-made man, to build up your confidence. How people, no matter how their status in life, can go and sit for a portrait and then own that idea of self-representation, own that sense of self, and that boosts your self-confidence. Now, Douglass, he inspired a lot of people. And another person he inspired was W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois, he definitely signifies elegance, sophistication, and strength. And he also used photography as a tool for social change. So he curated the 1900, he curated an exhibition at the at the Paris International Exhibition in 1900, and that was focused on Black photography. He showed Black excellence in its essence and core by photographing the middle class Black society and showing the beauty of the people, along with infographics that talked about these ideas of like racial injustice and things of that nature. So if you want to take that example and think how people before 1900 also took to Douglass's ideas and concepts about self-representation through photography, you can see here, we have the woman in the ruffled dress. She's from Benton Harbor, Michigan. Now take a good look at her. She's very elegant. She's standing in front of this like beautiful background, and she's wearing this lovely tailored dress. You can tell that she's a woman of means, that she has style, she has grace, and she's well poised. This counteracts this idea of African Americans being like, maybe this counters this negative idea that was in caricatures at the time, and actually shows that she is like a really beautiful, self-confident woman. But I don't want you just to associate self-confidence with money. If you look at this next image, you'll see this man. He is a African American man with pipe from Memoli County, Michigan, in 1887. He's also in a very similar background, but take a good look at his stance and his posture. He is like standing very confidently. His arms are folded. He has this pipe that's hanging out of his mouth, and and he is like like just kind of giving a little swagger there, just showing you like yes, he's this amazing rugged man, but he also has this sense of sophistication and confidence. And you can actually imagine that this pipe is really much a part of him, that he most likely smokes it all the time when he wants to relax or think or reflect. And so he wanted to be photographed with it so that whoever sees the photograph really gets a sense of who he is and his style and demeanor. I think style is a big part of this, especially when you're taking a photograph during the late 1800s, because you have to stand in front of the camera for a long period of time. Case in point, but let's talk about the next one. So we have a portrait of Finoyu, of a ballerina. This is basically a portrait from the Dante studio in 1920. Now, look at how this is actually a gift that she's given a copy of her photograph to Miss Dottie Wise. Now it's like photography is becoming very affordable, so you can take multiple pictures of yourself and actually have multiple prints of the same image, and you can hand them out to friends and family. But what I want you to really pay attention to is how Finu, she is standing here in her ballerina costume on point, right? So this is a really beautiful photograph, but also this tells you something about her strength and technique. If you look at the next image, I want you to notice look at the image on the left. I want you to notice the little girl all the way on the side of the corner and how her face is blurred. The reason why her face is blurred is because you have to stay still for quite a long time, like maybe like around 2 minutes or so, in order for the emotion to capture the image. And because of that, the rest of the family's face is also, you notice they're really serious. Uh, but it's not that they don't want to smile, but I want you to think about this for a minute. If you had to stay still for 2 minutes, could you hold your smile perfectly, not move? It's actually really challenging. You should try it sometime. So now let's go to the ballerina. She is standing straight, leaned up a little bit against the wall, so to kind of steady herself, but she's on point. So I want you to imagine that she is standing perfectly still, on point, in her pose, with a smile on her face, looking directly into the camera. Not only is she demonstrating style and grace, but she's also demonstrating her strength and technique. And so that in itself is really impressive. Especially she looks like she's around like between 8 or 10 years old. So imagine your 8 or 10-year-old daughter standing on point for 2 minutes, really like not making a sound, not moving. Like, I applaud her. So these are examples about how African Americans were really beginning to take the idea of photography and owning one's self image to heart, and really setting up imposing these portraits that shows you who they are. So if we continue, I want you to think now about community. Community is really important concept to, I believe, to Black excellence, because with the African American community, when we congregate together for one action or cause, there's strength there, there's support, there's kinship. There's this idea that we are a family and we are stronger together than we are apart. So here we see the next two photographs will be from Harvey Jackson, who also really embodies this concept. Harvey Jackson was a photographer in Detroit, Michigan during the basically like the early 1900s. And he was a community photographer in Detroit. He photographed schools and different community events. And basically he documented a lot of community events within the Black community. But he also staged these cinematic roles. Because again, you have to stand really still for a long period of time. So that gave him the opportunity to actually create a scene that had a lot of symbolism. Here, we're looking at the burning of the mortgage of the Phyllis Wheatley home in January 4th, 1915. Now, the Phyllis Wheatley home was basically a community center, a lodging house for women during the Great Migration. And so they would come from the South to the North in several cities, and they would house them and also give them other types of support. Sometimes it was employment support, health education with children, a lot of different good works. So here, basically, they are celebrating the burning of the mortgage of the Phyllis Wheatley home. Now, the burning of the mortgage is a tradition that started in many churches. And so once the congregation has paid off the mortgage, then they will burn it in a ceremony within the church. Eventually, what happened is that a lot of nonprofits started also doing this tradition of burning the mortgage. But Harvey Jackson took it one step further. He connected basically a string to the mortgage and had each person hold a string. That symbolically connected them to the act of the burning. And if you see the woman, she's like wearing black in the center, she's actually striking the match. So this is the very moment that they're getting ready to destroy the document. Now, think about that in the idea of community, that they've paid off and own the home, and that they're celebrating this together in such a beautiful way. But also, I want you to think about the church as being a place to support all kinds of good works. So if we look at the next image, we'll see basically this is the American Red Cross Society in the workroom of 156 at the Ebenezer AME Church in 1918. This is another Harvey Jackson photo. Now, if you think about the church, it's more than just a place of worship. Again, it's more of a community center as well as a place of worship. So people go there in order to socialize, learn different types of skills, do volunteer work and humanitarian works. So here you have the American Red Cross Society, and they are sewing and they're knitting socks for the sick and the poor. Now, the American Red Cross nurses, they used to call them the gray nurses, I think they still do. And so the uniform itself had this meaning. It symbolized humanitarianism and kindness. And so that was a very powerful statement for them to wear these the uniforms. But I also want you to notice that there's a person all the way on the left. So they're wearing, this is a woman, she's wearing a man's suit. And so Nowadays, for a woman to wear a man's suit is not a big deal, right? But during 1918, for a woman to wear pants, that was really risque. It was something that you didn't do. But the person over here, they're wearing the suit. They're showing who they are. This is their style. This is what they care about, and so they wanted to represent themselves in this portrait, in this way. Now, we can't say if the person in the woman wearing the suit or the person like is basically a nurse. We can assume so because they're in the portrait, but we really don't know. We also can't make basically assumptions on gender identity because gender identity at this time is this is different. The way that it's defined is different than the way it's defined now. But what we can what we can talk about is how they're wearing the clothing in order to show that you who they are. They're sitting front and center. Harvey Jackson has them knitting, and it's like in these big knitting needles so that you really can see them. And they're integrated into the group, so everyone's working together. So there's this idea of like acceptance and and doing this humanitarian work for the community and their strength. And there's something very beautiful about that. So if you think about it in those terms, right, that whether you're a little different from the group by wearing something different, or you're wearing the same thing as the group, but you're all doing the same action, that it's the action that's important. And it's the action hosted within the church that is important. It's the strength and the structure of the community. And so I love this photo. I love it so much because it shows the importance of Ebenezer AME. It shows the importance of the American Red Cross Society, and it shows the importance of working for your community. And during 1918, which was most likely this photograph was taken during the 1918 flu pandemic. It touches so close to everything that we're going through right now. And I just think about that when I see photos of people helping each other out in our day-to-day life, in the moments we're living in. If you think about that, I want you to think about what it means to be groundbreaking, right? So now I want to talk about the Colored American magazine. We're talking about creativity, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about groundbreaking work. So the Colored American magazine is it's like one of the first magazines produced by African Americans for African Americans to talk about our culture and issues that are important to the community. What's really interesting about the Colored American is that it had one, lots of photo spreads of African American leaders, intellectuals, entertainers. It had social commentary, and it had literary works, short stories, and serial novels. Now, the Colored American had readership was not merely African American, but also Caucasians read it as well. And because they had like such a diverse group of people reading the same periodical, the different authors and critics would talk to both communities simultaneously within their articles. One article that I would like you to think about, or just I want to point out to it, is basically it's the next slide. Yes, shall the 15th Amendment be repealed? Now, this is really important because now we're talking about the politics as in this magazine. There's a lot of political stories. And so at the time, during the basically the Montgomery Race Conference, there was a lawyer, his name was Burke Cochran. And he stated, he's like, he was an Irish immigrant, very successful lawyer. And he stated that there's a problem, was the race problem. is like the way to solve it is basically to deny African Americans the right to vote. So he says that if African Americans vote, then that causes tension within, like, Caucasian communities with the Black community, and so we just like should just go back to the way things were. Whereas Robert Carter, he basically pointed out that if you repeal the 15th Amendment, which is the right for African Americans the right to vote, then also they will have like a domino effect. It will cause the repeal for the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. So we're talking about the emancipation of slaves, and then the idea of naturalization. Now, the 13th and the 14th Amendment doesn't just talk about African Americans. It also talks about basically naturalizing indentured servants. Okay, so and also and also ending indentured servitude. So if you remove the 15th Amendment, then also you're removing the rights for people who are not African American, but for all Americans who fall under that idea of indentured servitude. Another point that Robert Carter made is that African Americans are naturalized citizens. They're born here. And because we're born here, and basically we're native citizens, not naturalized, sorry. Because we're born here, we have the opportunity to become president. That point, when I read that, was really struck me, because if you think about the concept of that in 1900, that was a very bold thing to say, that formerly enslaved people could one day run this country, like, whose ancestors were formerly enslaved could one day run this country, or not, like, but it's the idea of that is very strong. The Colored American magazine, what makes it innovating is that it talks about politics, it talks about culture, it talks about basically life in this periodical that people can connect to. And it also started a whole series of different periodicals: The Crisis magazine, Ebony magazine, and Jet. So if you look at this, years later, these magazines have the same framework as The Colored American. The Colored American was only in publication for 9 years, but Ebony and Jet and The Crisis have been around for decades. The Crisis for over 100 years. So if you look at this and you see the different ranges in the titles, you know, you see political activism, you see entertainers, you see social commentary, and in a couple of them, you even see the conversation about the votes. So you'll definitely see it if you look at the Obama picture and look right underneath you. Then you see basically Shirley Chisholm and talking about voter results. And then if you look all the way to the left, there's like a blue picture with a little like a fashion model. And then you're talking about Black power at the polls, right? So this idea of voting is still very contingent to African Americans' rights and identity, because if you have the right to vote, then you have the rights and also the power to share how you would like this country, the direction you would like this country to go. And so they would advertise that, they would discuss that within these different magazines. So if you think about The Colored American and Ebony and put them side by side, shall the 15th Amendment be repealed has kind of given like this a bit of foreshadowing to what was to come in the future, 100 years in the future. And you see our first Black president. This was a very, very proud, strong moment. This represents the concept of Black excellence, that we work together, build together, support each other with sophistication and style and grace. And then wonderful, beautiful things can happen. So now I want you to think about this. When you take your next photo, how are you going to present yourself in it? Will it represent who you are at this moment? Will it show people who look at it a sense of who you are and what you care about? What will someone think when they see it 100 years from now? And how will you represent the time that we're in and the things that are important? Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Samantha. That was wonderful. It's so wonderful to hear more about your thought process and your inspiration while creating this exhibit. Um, Before I do a few housekeeping announcements, Clayton, do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share right now?
Um, Thank you, Samantha. That was excellent and inspiring. I thank you very much. I've been watching some of the chat and some of the questions as they pop up, and I think we've got some interesting conversation ahead of us coming up. And but at this point, I guess I'll just say thank you, Samantha, for such an excellent presentation.
Great. And along those lines, everybody, keep putting your questions in the Q&A section. And I am just going to do a couple of housekeeping announcements, and then we'll get to those questions. All right. So the next episode of The Bookworm is celebrating our 1 year anniversary. I don't know how that happened, but on March 19th, we'll welcome back our panelists from episode 1 and have a conversation about what they've been reading about and learning about in the past year. So Richard Marsh will join us to discuss his collection of association copies. And Sarah Quashne will tell us about a book that she's read, No Man's Land by Wendy Moore, which is about female doctors in World War I London. And she'll probably have some interesting examples to tie to that from the Clements Library. And Paul Erickson, our director, is going to talk about the world of 19th century paper money. So it'll be a fun and diverse look at some of the things that they've been learning about and reading about in the past year. So I hope that you will join us for that. Because you're already registered for the Bookworm, you will receive a reminder for that session and other upcoming sessions. And if you're unable to attend, you will still receive the follow-up email with a link to the recording and the resources. We in fact, we'll send out that email later today for today's episode. And you can also view previous recordings and resources on our website. Thank you so much to everyone who participates in the Bookworm and for the financial support that many of you provide to the Clements Library. If you are interested, we would love to have you sponsor a future episode of the Bookworm. You can contact myself or Anne for more information about that. And again, we thank today's anonymous donor for their sponsorship of today's episode. In addition, I would like to extend our gratitude to Dave Walters. Dave was instrumental in the donation of the David V. Tinder collection of Michigan photography, which is prominently featured in this exhibit. Okay, those are all my announcements. So now we can get to our Q&A discussion. I'm excited.
Yeah. Can I add one thing, Angela?
Yes, please.
You mentioned Dave Walters and the Dave Tinder collection. Dave Tinder was a wonderful guy and a prolific collector of Michigan photography. And he would have loved this project, Samantha. And the photograph that you selected of the young ballerina was one of his personal favorite photos. I know this for a fact because Dave mentioned this several times, and I know we've got a lot of Dave's friends out in the audience listening, and I'm sure they would agree that he would absolutely have loved this project.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that is so lovely. Um, so let's talk more about the project. Um, what do we have here in the Q&A? Elizabeth is asking, in the 1800s, did the subjects get proofs and thus allowed to choose the image they wanted, or was it only one picture taken and you had to live with it?
So it was one picture taken and you had to live with it. But the thing is, though, if you think of the way that we take photography now, you can take a snapshot and it's pretty much instantaneous. So you can take several snapshots and then see a proof and then print them off. During the in the 1800s, what happened is you had to create an emulsion plate. And so you're basically putting this light sensitive emulsion onto the plate, and then you're putting it into the photograph, and you have to stand there for basically for a few minutes. And then it slowly, as the light enters into the camera, it creates the image. Now, I think also you have to think about the idea of when you're setting it up, you're taking more time to set up the pose. So you kind of have an idea about what it's going to look like. And the excitement of seeing what emerges is also part of like the thrill of having the photograph. So it's like now that we live in this instantaneous culture, it's like we want to like kind of like just take we can take 100 photographs and then select one. But at that moment, it's a bit more precious with that process.
I think that's a really good point, Samantha, about our instantaneous culture. It's very different from 19th century photography. Yeah, it was slower and you didn't know quite where it was going at the time, especially during the Daguerrean era. What you got was what you got. Later on, by the time that there were glass negatives and paper prints, it was possible to get a proof sheet from a negative, and you could order your card photographs by the dozen once you just found one you liked. But I think that's a very good point about how we expect everything to be instant and immediate results now. It wasn't always the case.
Right. And I'll just mention to our attendees that that Clayton gave a very good overview of the history of photography in a previous Discover series. So that can be found on our website. I know I learned a lot from from that session. So it's interesting to think about. All right. So James Davis is asking, a number of reformers, especially urban reformers, used photography in the late 1800s and early 1900s to publicize the need for various reforms. Many of them were part of the progressive movement, and they often used photographs of immigrants and immigrant communities to promote reforms. Do you know if some of these reformers valued and perhaps used the photographs of African Americans during this era to highlight African Americans in the African American community?
Yeah, absolutely. Samantha's probably seen them, but we have some photos in the collection that have printed on the back a statement that says the revenue generated by the sale of this photograph will support freedmen schools in the South during the Civil War. And these would often be photographs of emancipated slaves. It's an interesting topic because many of these photos included very light-skinned emancipated slaves from New Orleans, and why these children were chosen to represent enslavement as opposed to darker skinned people is a very interesting question.
Samantha, do you have more to add? You look like you were about to say something.
Oh, no, no, no. It was basically the poll keeps popping up on my screen, so I just um I think, well, basically, if you think about that, yes, photography was used to talk about Reformation. I think about the Fisk singers from Fisk University. Um, they used photography to help raise money for the school. If you think about the origin of the Fisk singers, uh, basically the school was going to go defunct, and so they had to find money really quick to save the school. So they created the choir and did basically European tours. And they still exist today. They still hold the tradition of singing and performing internationally. And if you think about the idea of photography, selling that image and promoting the idea of reform is very strong, and we still sort of use that idea today in a lot of activism.
I'd also add that Sojourner Truth used photography directly to raise money to support herself and her anti-slavery speaking tours. And there's numerous examples of photographs of her with the printed slogan, I sell the shadow to support the substance, as a reference to her selling photographs to keep herself going. So that's a great question, Jim. Thank you for asking.
Yes, indeed. Oh, Jim has another question. I've read that Frederick Douglass was the most photographed person in the antebellum America. Um, do you know if that's true?
Yes, that was true. Basically, the more that I read about Frederick Douglass, the more I learn about him. He's a really interesting man. Basically, he believed that if he would photograph himself as many times as possible, and use it in many different kinds of contexts, that he's changing the narrative of or the stereotype about African Americans. Also, that's sort of like a performance if you think about it, especially what you have to do to take a photograph during his era, and to do it over and over and over again throughout your whole life. Now he's taken over to he's taken over 160 known photographs. That's just the ones that we know. There might be some out there that we don't know. So it's yes, it's he's Frederick Douglass was very intentional in everything that he did. And he also was a very big benefactor and enthusiast of the arts. And he was also a musician. So he was a performer himself. So I think, yes, that's true.
There's a terrific book that came out a few years ago called Picturing Frederick Douglass by John Stauffer, and is an attempt to uh, identify and put in chronological order every known photograph of Frederick Douglass taken from life, plus also charting artwork done based on those photos contemporaneous to Douglass's life, and it's an amazing statement, and it really builds the case for Douglass being the most photographed 19th century American. Um, the question I'm curious about is who's number two? It might be Geronimo, who was also widely photographed and used photography himself to support himself. Great question, Jim. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Beth's question is about she has a pretty big collection of 1870s to 1900s photographs and wondering about how to share them with U of M. So, Beth, I will just say that if you're talking about making a donation, that is, and I'll let everybody else know that too, that our curators are always happy to take a look and see if it fits into our collection or to help direct you to one of the other collections at U of M. And if you're just talking about a way to discuss the photographs with other people, hopefully someday COVID will go away and we can get back to our What's in Your Attic program, which was always a lot of fun, where we invite people to bring their paper collections or items from their family to the Clements to share with other collectors and the curators and the public, and just to have a nice day of sharing with each other. So we'll let everybody know that those are two possible options, and you can always email me and ask those kinds of questions. Just respond to the emails that you get about the bookworm, and I'm happy to direct you.
Yeah, the What's in Your Attic was fun. Look forward to doing one of those again.
Yeah, definitely. Seeing actual humans, seeing actual collections, both. So Hal is asking, did you think about looking at any photos of Black sailors in the Union Navy during the Civil War, since their poses, body language, etc., aren't just confident, but downright cocky?
Yeah, yes. Actually, I have a couple, so I know exactly what you're talking about. So basically, what happened is I was here. We built this exhibit during the pandemic, so that we started it exactly when it hit and everyone went remote. So there are things that I would like to include in the exhibit that were a bit challenging, just because I didn't have access to those materials. But if I was to do this again, yes, I would definitely include them because they are amazing. Yes,
Well, maybe there will have to be an addendum someday.
yeah, someday, yes, we definitely definitely do it again. There's so much in the this collection and other collections that are so amazing. That's why I love archives so much. They hold the essence of who we are, and it's just like, if you were to walk like down in the vault and just see all of the boxes and file folders, everything extending up into the air, then you'll kind of get an essence or an idea about how much history is within the walls of the Clemens and other places. And if you could walk around and select and have a moment just to kind of access those things, it's amazing. It's powerful, which is why we teach with them. This is why we study them. And if I could spend my whole entire life just going through the collection, even just the collection here, which is absolutely amazing, and creating exhibitions for people to really engage with these materials and learn and explore, then that would be like, that's why I'm studying at the School of Information, so that I can learn how to be a good archivist and learn how to make good programming. What I would love to say is, I think people should go to the libraries more and really explore these collections. Um, Take a deep dive and see what you find. And as the libraries are now opening up more digitation programs and they're putting more things online for people to find, keep exploring. Even if you go to that institution maybe a couple of months ago, and you didn't find what you were looking for, it might show up a few months later, because these different libraries are digitizing their materials and making them available to the public. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're living an amazing time.
Thank you. Thanks, Samantha. So Clayton, maybe you can talk a little bit about, because we are really digitizing that at what seems like a great rate, but we have so much more to do. Maybe you could just touch upon the size of our photograph collections and, what's available online currently.
Uh, yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. I, I I agree with Samantha that it's a wonderful experience to be exploring the collections within the Clements and discovering things that have been there for a long time that I just hadn't seen before. It's a constant voyage of discovery, even within the existing collections. And the photography collection over the last 30 years has grown enormously. We're now somewhere north of 150,000 photographic images total. The Dave Tinder collection itself is probably over 100,000 photos just by itself. And we continue to acquire more and build on what we have. But when the numbers get to be that big, it's, you're constantly coming across things that you hadn't noticed before. Or as you learn new ways to look at things, then you can go back and take a second look, and maybe something has a different meaning the second time you've looked at it. I also think a lot about, in relation to Samantha's project, about how libraries like the Clements and fine art museums like the Chicago Art Institute, where Samantha studied, are moving closer together in some ways. Libraries are much more conscious of our public programming and our outward facing exhibits, even though we are a research library at the core. And art museums like the Art Institute in Chicago or UMA down the street from us here in Ann Arbor are taking on more things like vernacular photography into their collections, the same kind of photos that the Clements may have. They are using more archival supporting evidence in their exhibits. And it seems like the gap between what used to be two very mutually exclusive worlds has really come much closer together. And Samantha, your experience and your project kind of bridges that gap in an interesting way.
Yeah, so it's I spent the past 10 years basically in the art world creating archive projects, and it's been quite a journey, because at first the art world was just like, what's this? Is this history? I'm not sure. But now it's the art world has totally embraced the archive world. It's like those exhibitions get so much more attention than they used to, and so they enjoy supporting them and supporting artists who create them. I agree with you, Clayton. Everything is kind of merging. It's like, hey, where's the line? but but I think that's what makes it exciting, that these lines are blurring, and people have different ways of accessing materials.
Right.
And with the library, it's like you get more of a hands-on experience, because you can like actually like make a request and say, hey, like, I see this is in your your image bank or in your catalog, and I would like to take a closer look at it. So
yeah, that's a good point. In the library, it's a one-on-one relationship with the material.
yeah, it's just like yeah. Awesome.
So regards to the digitization, we're only at the beginning, really. We've digitized a very small percent of what the library's holdings are. We are deeply invested in digitization, and I expect that we'll continue to expand in the future. But the vast majority of the materials in the library are not online. So when scholars have questions about what the library holds, we really welcome inquiries, because there may be great material that's hidden from view online. But yet we will make it available as best we possibly can.
Yes, exactly. So thank you. This next question is interesting. So Susan is asking us to use our imaginations a little bit and think about into the future. And with the vastly increased number of cameras being used today, what do you predict a presentation on this topic might include in the future?
That's exciting. If you think about it, I think what you'll see is a combination of one, professional photography, two, photojournalism, three, the idea of the accumulation of things you see on social media. People are like, attaching images to hashtags now, and so that you can get these like little miniature collections on the same topic from various different people. So now it's almost like this huge collective memory of an experience. I think that photography now, and the way that it's moving and shifting, is moving into that moment. And I also think that anytime that society goes through any kind of social shift or strains or pressures, creates more autistic interpretations and representations from that era. So I believe that like what's being photographed now, and there are different archives that are collecting material, some people at this moment documenting this moment in order to for us to remember and to preserve this for the future. So if you think about it through photography, then I think that those photographs are going to really touch on the core of who we are and how this moment and the various things that have happened have affected us. And I've already seen it like over the summer and even still currently now, when you look at things posted in magazines, in newspapers, on social media, it's a lot of rich images. What that topic would be, like if you just want to like kind of drum it down into a topic, I couldn't say yet because we're still in that moment. But I do know, I think that the exhibit most likely will have this kind of like collective memory impact of hundreds, even thousands of people contributing to one social moment through image.
Yeah, your point about the hashtags curate essentially curating mini exhibits is so interesting because I often click on the hashtags in Instagram for that purpose to see what kinds of things people contribute to those different topics. And that is a really interesting thought about it, that there's almost this immediate curation.
Do you
Yeah.
go backwards and take a photo with a hashtag in mind?
Well, yes, that's a good point too. Once you see what everybody else is posting, then you're like, oh, now I have some inspiration and ideas. So it does, it goes in both directions, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of is. That's what makes it really interesting. It's like this really intricate web or a tapestry of image through context. So if you if you think about that, like that's what makes it kind of exciting. That's what makes this like exhibit for me very exciting because a lot of these images are taken from like 100 years ago and or older, and so I had a chance to kind of look back and reflect on that. And think about things. But then I also saw how some of those moments touched moments we're in right now. So if we think about what this exhibit would look like, uh, doing with today, I think that also would be exciting because yeah, I would probably start with the hashtags because it's just so easy for you just to kind of like it's the same thing. It's like going through a box, like that you would get in an archive, but now this is a digital archive. So yeah, I would curate images, tweets, and different things like that, and kind of integrate them together in a very interesting, interactive way.
Very nice. Um, well, I think we're to the end of our time. Do either of you have any wrap up things you would like to say before we bid everybody goodbye?
Um, Basically, I like to say that this, like creating this exhibit was a really amazing experience. Um, there was so much in the Clemens that I wanted to include, but had to but keeping it like but what I did make was very inspirational, and um, that I think that we need more exhibits kind of explore things like this. Like, it talks about history in a different lens. Because I think that, you know, history, there are so many different aspects of it depending on your point of view. And if you take all those points of view and you put them together, then you create something amazing for conversation and thought. Uh, Dialogue is essential. So I'm just thank you. I just want to thank the William L. Clements Library for supporting the fellowship, supporting me, uh, and just giving me an experience of a lifetime. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Samantha, for putting together such a fine exhibit. And when this project started, I didn't foresee how well it would complement another student internship project, which is an online exhibit at the Clements, No Not Even for a Picture, about Native American photography and the relationship between Native American subjects and photographers. And I think your two projects are marvelously complementary. And I'd like to say we planned it that way all along, but no, we didn't.
It was just serendipitous, but good serendipity.
But yeah, and thanks Angela and Tracy and Ann and the team that puts these Zoom presentations together so well. And I'm proud to be a part of this.
Well, thank you both. This was a really marvelous way to spend Friday morning. And thank you, everybody who joined us today and participated with your great questions. And we'll see you all next month or at our Bending Lines program next week, which you can find more information about online. All right. So goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.